Chapter 15 is the before last chapter that we're going to study in this microeconomics class. It's about the labor market. There are two main reasons why this chapter is interesting to study. First of all, it helps us to apply the principles of economic reasoning that we've been studying since the beginning of this block. Second of all, it helps to connect producers and consumers because producers are on the demand side for the labor market and consumers are on the supply side of the labor market. So consumers supply labor and producers, they demand labor, and so labor is one of the major inputs that we've already seen as a factor of production that are used by firms. Let's start with this demand side. So we're going to assume that the firm is hiring workers at a given wage W. And the firm is trying to determine what will be the optimal level of that input of labor that it wants to use in order to produce a given level of output. We're going to start out by studying the situation of a perfectly competitive firm in the short run. And we're going to therefore assume that the firm is a price taker, since this is a perfectly competitive market. And we're also going to assume that capital is fixed when labor is the input that varies. So what quantity of labor should the firm decide to use at a given wage W? What should be its decision rule? We're going to define the following concept, which is the value of marginal product of labor. This is the value at the current market price of the extra output produced by an additional unit of labor. So VMP of L is equal to the price of the good that is sold on the market times the marginal product of labor. Given this value of marginal products, the hiring rule of the firm will be to choose the quantity of labor such that VMP of L is equal to the wage that it pays its laborers. Why does this make sense? What would happen if the value of marginal product of labor were greater than the price at which the firm pays the labor, so the wage? If VMP of L were greater than the wage, the firm could increase its profits by hiring more workers. However, if the value of marginal product of labor were inferior to the wage, then this time the firm could increase its profit by laying off some workers, so therefore by reducing the quantity of workers that it employs. Same reasoning when we're looking at a market that is not in perfect competition. So an imperfect competitor's demand for labor will reason in the exact same way. The only difference is that this time the firm is a price maker and not a price taker. So we're going to define a concept which is similar to the one that we just saw, but which is slightly different, which is the marginal revenue product, the MRP, which is the amount by which total revenue increases with the employment of an additional unit of labor. So MRP of L is equal this time to marginal revenue times the marginal product of labor. So here it's not price times the marginal product of labor, it's marginal revenue times the marginal product of labor. The reason why this is because the firm would have to reduce the price at which it sells its good if it wants to increase its output, and therefore if it wants to sell an extra unit. So here price is not a fixed number, it's not a constant term. So the value at which or the extra revenue that it gets by producing an extra output, that's equal to the marginal revenue. So said differently, the firm here faces a downward sloping demand curve, and this is represented by the fact that marginal revenue has replaced price. But the reasoning is really the same whether you're looking at a perfectly competitive firm or at an imperfectly competitive firm in terms of how is it going to make its decision as to what is going to be its optimal level of labor that it's going to employ. So here the hiring rule is that the firm will choose the quantity of labor such that the marginal revenue product of labor is equal to the wage. Once again, why does this make sense? If the marginal revenue product of labor were greater than the wage, then that would mean that the firm should increase its labor. Indeed, the extra units of labor that it uses would generate more total revenue than the cost of labor. Said differently, if it increased its labor, so if the marginal revenue product of labor were greater than the wage, that means that it could increase its profit by increasing the number of workers that it uses. On the other hand, if the marginal revenue product if the marginal revenue product of labor were inferior to the wage, then the firm should reduce labor. Indeed, that would mean that the wage paid is greater than the extra total revenue generated. Therefore, the firm could do better in terms of its profit if it reduced the number of workers that it employs.